All right, in this video, we're looking at day 2 of our coil pot. I've got my coil pot here. It's on a banding wheel. The bottom is now drier. It was sitting on this board, and you can see the board is still lightly damp where the pot was. And now it won't stick to the banding wheel. I've kind of put it in the middle, and again, I'm always looking at the profile of the pot to really get this view just right. So before I start putting coils on, I could spend a little bit of time. If this was kind of wet before and floppy, now it's firmed up just a little. You can see that I can still wiggle it and change its shape, but it's firmer. And this is important if you're building something larger or wider, that the bottom dries out so it is strong enough to support the weight of the top. If I'm working on the inside here, I could take my rib, and you'll notice everything I do is repetitive. So I'm gently pushing out against my hand. Now, if I was making a bowl, I would probably want this inside to be really smooth. But because I'm making a bottle and no one's gonna see it, I don't want it to crack, but I don't need to focus on getting every little dent fixed. But if this was a bowl, that would be important. On the outside, I could do the same thing. I wanna go at least one time all the way around. You can see I'm kind of smoothing out the shape, getting rid of any little crumbs. I could use my paddle, and I could paddle the outside. If one side seemed more out than the other, or I wanted to paddle some of those dents away, paddle the side in, I could use this paddle to stretch it just a little bit out. Don't stretch it too much, but stretch it maybe a little bit out. That could also help get rid of some of those dents. There's no wrong tool to use, but what we need to focus on, because we're not trying to make every part of this perfect yet, we need to focus on moving on to the next coil. So as with last time, my first coil each day especially, it's very important that I scratch the surface of where the coil is gonna go thoroughly. And usually my first coil, I just attach one coil at a time. And so I'm gonna go back and kind of scratch it. I'm gonna scratch on this outside edge a little bit, where I'm going to be blending it. And I'm going to scratch on this inside edge where I'm going to be blending it. Because I want to make sure this next coil, the first coil each day, is a really strong attachment. Your coil pot, if it cracks or if it breaks, it'll probably be on one of your coil seams, and most likely it would be on a coil that was from day 1 to day 2, or the day 1 coil, or day 3 to day 4, or any of those, the transition coils. So you can see now I'm putting some water. I'm just dabbing it on with a brush today instead of my fingers. It works a little better. And you can see I'm not spreading it like this. I'm not pushing down to soften my cracks. I want to just kind of fill those little scratch marks with some water. This is going to soften the clay because I've increased the surface area, but it's also going to make this area kind of gluey and sticky. And the texture of it with more surface area makes the sticking on of the adhesion a little bit better. Okay. Now, if you're really afraid of breaking your project, you might even go back very lightly and just do a little bit more scratching, and this will even make it stickier, because now there'll be even more kind of goopy, muddy stuff. You're making what's called surface slip. Water plus scratching will make surface slip. Okay, so now I've got a really thoroughly scratched area, and I'm ready for my first coil. Now, with my coil pot, I'm not really gonna go any wider than this. For your project, if you're doing this in 2024 for the coil pot project, it needs to be 6 inches tall at minimum and 6 inches wide. I want you to see, right now I'm at about 8 inches. So I've already got my width, but my height is only about 4 inches, 4.5 inches. I'm gonna make mine taller. Don't try to make minimums. Make what you want, but just make it big enough to be 6 by 6. That's the requirement for the project. So I've got my coil. Remember, I'm always gonna start kind of where my last coil left off. I'm just gonna place this coil first, just very lightly down. Okay, I'm gonna just kind of roll this one back right now on itself. And I'm gonna really carefully kind of push down this coil all the way around, you can see I'm pushing down and in a little bit. And you'll see the coil kind of shifts. But I really want to attach this coil all the way around. I don't want to leave any spot that isn't compressed. You can see I'm pushing down and in, just kind of rotating down and in. Very light, not trying to really blend the coil in yet, just seating the coil down. I'm holding one side up. And this is where the banding wheel is really nice. You should work on a banding wheel because you don't have to turn your project by moving it. You can leave the project in place. But with a lot of things, if we're trying to make something radially symmetrical, we're trying to do repetitive motions without moving too much. Now that I'm overlapping my fresh clay and my fresh clay, I don't need water. I don't need scratch marks. That will be fine. And I'm just finishing this coil up. And I know that I'm gonna be going pretty much straight and going up a little bit, and then I'm gonna start curving in, okay? So that's where I'm gonna be. Now the first thing I'm gonna do is make sure my coil's straight. I wanna make sure that I like how it's sitting. If I need to move it out a little bit in some spot or move it in a little bit in some spot, I can do that. Again, I'm looking along this side. I wanna make sure that I'm kind of going straight up and down. So before I blend these coils, I'm just making sure they're in the right position. Now I'm gonna blend this coil in, and I wanna blend it into those side scratch marks. You can see I'm blending the inside. Notice my hand is supporting on the inside so I don't change its shape. If your finger starts to get wet, when we're blending coils, we don't want a wet finger. We want our finger a little drier so that when we push down, the clay kind of smears and we're not just sliding across the surface. We want to pull some clay down, if you remember from the previous video. So when you're putting coils on your project, you really only need to use water when you're attaching that first coil. Try not to use any other water if you can. There's enough water in the soft clay to do all the attaching that we need. When you start using water, you start making a mess, and it's a little harder to make sure that you really join the clay together. So that outside is blended. I'm gonna go to the inside and do the same thing. Got my hand supporting it. I normally would probably do this close to my body, but I want you to see it. You can see I'm being methodical. I'm supporting with my back hand so my shape doesn't change too much. And I'm blending this clay down. This first coil or two that I'm blending, it's really important that they're blended well. Again, my finger is getting kind of messy because of that surface slip that I made. So I'm just kind of wiping my finger off occasionally. I want to keep my hands when I'm hand building pretty clean, pretty dry. Water is not a tool that you use all the time. On the pottery wheel, lots of water. Hand building, not lots of water. Okay, now that I got that attached on there, I've got my first coil. I'm gonna do a little bit of cleanup really quickly. All the clay is wet. You can see I'm just taking my metal rib. I'm gonna scrape away some of that extra stuff that got scraped down the side. And now basically my pot did get a little bit taller because of that extra coil, but really what my goal was to do is to get fresh, soft clay up here that I can attach my coils on. And I'm just cleaning up any excess off the side by very lightly scraping it off. Okay, now I'm ready to continue coiling. This next part I'm gonna just time lapse through because what I'm doing is adding coils, and I wanna go kind of up, and then I'm gonna start curving in. When I start curving in, I will talk about that process and how we do that.